Well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Erin Tesch, a Managing Director at TSG, and I'd like to start off by saying thank you for joining us. The purpose of today's webinar is really to give participants an opportunity to hear from some of our TSG consultants and provide a forum for people to ask questions about various regulatory and technical challenges they face associated with obtaining the required regulatory approvals to get your antimicrobial product to market. We've got a large crowd today. We have over 200, close to 260 participants on this webinar today. We did receive questions from folks that when they registered, and we encourage participants to ask questions via the chat function. In addition to moderating this event, I'm going to put my multitasking skills to test and do my very best to monitor the questions and ask our panelists for answers. Before we start, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I will provide a very brief overview of TSG and Science Group. When we wrap up, I'd like to make you aware of some white papers that we've recently written over the last several months related to antimicrobial products that may be of interest to you. So let's start with our introductions. Let's start with Abigail Wacek, then Dr. Christine Greene, and then Lisa Amadio. Abby?
Good morning, Abigail Wacek. I'm a Senior Regulatory Consultant with TSG and Director of Operations. I've been with TSG for about 9 years. I focus primarily on antimicrobial pesticide product registration. Before TSG, I worked in the Antimicrobials Division of EPA's Office of Pesticides Programs. In addition to my work consulting, I'm also the Operations Manager for 2 task forces, the Silver Task Force and the Zinc Task Forces North America.
Great, thanks, Abby. Chris?
Chris, you're on mute.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Christine Greene. I've been with TSG for just over a year now. I'm a Senior Regulatory Consultant, providing support to the EPA regulatory team for device efficacy testing and other EPA-regulated efficacy testing needs. I also support the Canadian team for Canadian registrations with NNHPD. I have a lot of experience working with the industry from my previous days at NSF International, particularly with device efficacy testing and protocol development.
Great, thank you, Chris. Lisa?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Amadio. I'm a Principal Regulatory Consultant here. I've been with TSG for approximately 5 years. Prior to that, I have approximately, or more than, we won't talk about that, 25 years of experience in industry specializing in antimicrobial registration. So I've done registrations for active ingredients, for I&I products, and also consumer products.
Great, thanks, Lisa. So before we get started, for those of you who are not familiar with TSG Consulting, I just wanted to say very briefly a few words about our company. We've been providing companies around the world with regulatory and technical guidance for over 30 years. We help clients address technical regulatory issues associated with getting their products to market in multiple jurisdictions, as well as assist them to understand their compliance obligations and essentially stay out of trouble. We are part of Science Group, which is listed on the London Stock Exchange. Science Group has offerings in 3 core areas: strategic consulting, product development, and regulatory support. We serve a number of key markets and industry sectors, including agricultural, industrial, consumer, food and beverage, animal health, and medical. Our teams are comprised of scientists, engineers, and regulatory experts, many of whom have held previous positions at regulatory agencies such as Abigail. The Science Group family has over 500 staff members around the globe. We speak more than 30 different languages. We have 14 offices, and we have 2 dedicated R&D facilities in the UK. Some of the topics that we're going to touch on today, based on the questions that we've received thus far, will revolve around pesticidal devices and claims, electrostatic sprayers and efficacy testing, residual claims and efficacy testing requirements, EPA's List N, what is it, how do I get on it, FIFRA Section 18 emergency use exemptions, and as well as treated article and marketing claims. So again, I encourage you all to submit your questions throughout the presentation via the chat function. Given the number of participants that we have in this webinar, we may not be able to get through all the questions, and we would encourage you to reach out to us after the webinar if we can assist you. So with that, let's get started here. Let's start looking at the questions. Okay, so the first question I have for my colleagues is, when is a product considered a device versus a pesticide? And I think I'm going to punt that over to Abigail.
Good. Well, thank you for that question. So this is a pesticidal device is a product that uses physical means to control a pest. A pesticide is a product that uses chemical means to control a pest. Now, when EPA discusses physical means, this is something that involves not just something like a ground vibrator, but also air ionizer units or UV lights. Pesticide devices are regulated by EPA. However, they do not require registration at the federal level. They are registered in 7 states. Pesticide products that use these chemical means to control pests are registered with EPA and in every state in which they're distributed and sold.
Okay, terrific. Thank you, Abby. Another question that's coming up is, List N is for COVID-related products. Where can the approved active substances for antimicrobials be found? Lisa, do you want to take that, or Abby? I saw Abby starting to respond.
Sure, I'll go ahead and take that one as well. And Lisa, feel free to jump in to expand upon this. So yes, EPA maintains a list of registered disinfectants with claims against SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-related claims, which is on List N. EPA does have other lists of registered disinfectants. They have List L, List K, products that are efficacious, for example, against C. diff, are all listed on EPA's website. EPA, you can also look on their website for products registered by their active ingredients. EPA does not have a list of just active ingredients that are all approved for antimicrobial use. However, you can look up an active ingredient, see if it's registered with EPA, and then view the products under that. You can look at that. The easiest way through EPA's website is the Pesticide Product Label System, or PPLS. Lisa, anything to add?
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. This question is about residual claims. How do I get residual efficacy claims? Lisa, you want to take that one?
I can. Can you repeat the question? I was having some conductivity issues.
Oh, no, that's fine. So how does one get residual efficacy claims on their product?
So if you are trying to get residual efficacy claims, EPA just recently added some additional guidance to their residual efficacy information. They've had a long-standing protocol for residual claims for sanitization, which is a 24-hour claim with a limit of 10 minutes, and it was for reducing the number of organisms on a surface. EPA recently issued new interim guidance that was issued in October of 2020 that now has expanded that. There's some interim guidance that allows you to make viral claims now on surfaces, which is new, following some protocols that they have published on their website. And then they also allow for supplemental antimicrobial claims for products that are making longer claims for products like films, coatings, and other treated surfaces. And that allows you to follow their protocols to get claims for viruses and bacteria at not having to perform as a disinfectant. And Chris, you might want to explain some of the methodology that's allowed for residual claims.
Yeah, I'm not on mute anymore, right? Right. Okay, good. So sure. So as you were explaining, so there's really two buckets of product types that are eligible for the residual claim. So we have our standard disinfectants, right, that are already, they meet the EPA requirements for a disinfectant. But now those products can, assuming they pass the test, can have long-lasting claims. So that's the residual disinfectant. The performance criteria for residual disinfectants is a 5-log reduction against bacteria and then a 3-log reduction against viruses. So as you pointed out, there's that separate bucket, the supplemental residual antimicrobial products. Coatings and films is one, and then we've got the fixed solids and paints. The performance criteria for those products is a 3-log reduction, both for bacteria and for viruses. So, and I think you were alluding to that this is interesting, that you can get a 3-log reduction performance criteria against viruses, because typically you have to show against the disinfection criteria. You have to have that 5-log reduction or better against bacteria in order to have that. You have to be a disinfectant, not a sanitizer. So it's an interesting layout. But I think the reason that EPA is good with this is because these products are supplemental to your disinfectant. They don't have disinfection claims per se. They're supplemental residuals. So they fall in that bucket where they also have unique labeling claims, and then there is the, help me remember, stewardship program that those products also have to comply with. The testing includes an abrasion and chemical wear test. That's part of this long-lasting test methodology. And they specify 3 different chemicals for the chemical abrasion or chemical types. So if your product isn't going to pass, or you're concerned about any one of those, then you really should go to EPA and talk to them in advance of doing the testing. If you're going to modify what they have for guidance right now for that test methodology, if you're going to modify it in any way, like you want to use a different carrier because the way your product is applied, the stainless steel carrier might not really suffice. I would, TSG recommends that you bring that forward to the EPA first, get their blessing before you run and do the testing, because it can be quite expensive. Not something I would want to have to run through more than once.
Okay. And the other thing for that is that EPA does have a provision for if you're looking to get the SARS-CoV or onto List N, that you can do an expedited review. So there is a provision that EPA has a methodology for you to try to request expedited review. And Abby, you have some information on how EPA's working on the expedited review.
So I'll tie this one up by just a comment for any kind of EPA submissions right now, is that EPA is for COVID-19 related products, these SARS-CoV-2 claims, is committed to expediting a review. Their version of expediting and your version of expediting are probably pretty different. EPA is generally committed to reviewing these products 1 to 2 months faster than they otherwise would. So it is something that they are quite committed to and have devoted a number of resources to. However, there's been a tremendous number of applications that have been submitted to EPA that are all requesting expedited review. And unfortunately, we are seeing that EPA is no longer meeting those expedited review timelines as consistently as they once were. And in fact, they're generally slipping back to on-time review, if not requiring additional time. And this is, of course, having also a greater impact on products that do not qualify for List N, which are not priority with EPA right now. So the agency is very committed to reviewing your applications, but they only have so many staff, and I have to say the last year has really tested their resources. So some patience, but EPA is trying very hard.
Okay, thank you. We're getting a number of questions about devices. I'm going to ask, there's some follow-on questions, but I do want to point out that TSG actually did a webinar in April on pesticidal devices and it was recorded, and it can be downloaded from our website. Okay, this question is pretty specific, but I think it's relevant to a number. I know we've gotten this question before. My device uses titanium dioxide to produce radicals to treat surfaces in a room. Am I a device, or do I need to register as a pesticide? So, Lisa, you want to start that? And I'm pretty sure Abby has something to follow up on that.
Okay, so EPA makes a clarification on devices. If it is done by physical means, then EPA considers it a device. If you use a chemical, such as, for example, titanium dioxide, to assist in the reduction or kill of those microorganisms, then EPA may consider that requiring a FIFRA registration. Now, EPA does have a mechanism for you to have your device or your product reviewed to determine whether it's a device or if it would require a Section 3 registration through a PREA code where you will provide certain information. And Abby, you've outlined what type of information that may be needed for that application.
Absolutely. So if you do have a product and you're not sure whether or not it's a pesticide or whether or not it should be a pesticidal device, you can submit information to EPA, including your device schematics, information about how it works, what your claims will be, what your labeling will be. EPA will evaluate all of that information under the Pesticide Registration Improvement Act, or PREA, review category they have to make a FIFRA or non-FIFRA determination. For those who are not into the slang, FIFRA is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. It's the congressional law under which pesticides are regulated in the United States. And so you can ask EPA whether or not your product is a pesticide or a pesticidal device. They will provide you with a device determination based on the information that you've given to them. I want to add also something on devices, and I think I saw a question on this, so I may be jumping ahead. But there is also a difference between pesticide devices and applicator devices. Applicators are how you use to apply a product, maybe a backpack sprayer in the field to apply a conventional pesticide. Those are not pesticidal devices. The way that, to Lisa's point, the titanium dioxide generator is considered a pesticidal device. So there is that distinction between applicators and pesticidal devices.
Great, thank you. I think the follow-on question that I have that's related is, how do we recommend navigating the use of on-site generators? How does that sort of work in this regulatory scheme?
I'll jump back in if it's all right with everyone for a quick answer on that one. And that is, so this is a pretty common, especially products that, for example, you put salt and water in, you run a current, you get a hypochlorous acid generator, and those are on-site. EPA is familiar with these types of on-site generators, and the devil is really in the details into how you market and sell the chemicals that are input into that device. So in this example, if you provide the device and you instruct your customers to go buy table salt, whatever kind of table salt they want, then that is a device, regulated as a device, and the salt is not registered because it's not being sold for a pesticidal purpose. But if you want to package and sell salt for use with your device, then that salt does then become a pesticide and does require registration with EPA.
One more thing I'd like to add to that, Abby, because you talked about the device being regulated, is that we want to say that devices are exempt from FIFRA registration, but they are still regulated by EPA, which means that they do require labeling requirements, and they have to be manufactured in a pesticide establishment, which also has reporting requirements associated with those establishments. So even though it may not be required to be registered as a under FIFRA Section 3, it does still have labeling and production requirements associated with the device.
I'm in on that. Piggyback off of what Lisa pointed out. So as a with those labeling requirements, if that device is making label claims that are public health related claims, then they do need efficacy data to support those claims. While that data may not necessarily get submitted to EPA, at least at the state level. They are required to have it on hand if they are ever asked for it. And kind of a side note, I know that EPA is really stepping up their oversight right now of devices that are coming into the United States with claims. They are recognizing that there are a lot more, that there's a lot of work that they have kind of let set aside for probably too long, and so there is really a heightened awareness from the side of EPA with respect to devices that are making public health claims, especially COVID claims.
Yeah, the OECA had come out with some guidance, some advisories to that effect. All right, the next question I have actually has to do with Canadian registration. The question is, I submitted a DIN application for my hard surface disinfectant. Health Canada issued a screening deficiency notice for one of the actives. Is not registered for this use in Canada. We need to file a new drug submission. How is this different from a DIN application? I'm going to give this one to Chris.
Yeah, thank you. So as I understand the question, it is basically, what's the difference between a new drug submission versus a DIN application? So most companies in the disinfection, cleaning industry that are registering products are familiar with DIN registrations in Canada. It's a pretty usual regulatory pathway. But then if you have an ingredient in that product formulation that is not registered for use already in Canada and it's part of your formulation, Canada will require you to go through this NDS or new drug submission application process. So there's basically two main differences. One is that, and assuming, again, that the claims between these two applications are the same, right? So two comparable products. The DIN application will only require that you submit efficacy data to support the claims on the application. In contrast, a new drug submission is going to require that you submit all the data that would be similar to what you may have to submit to EPA. That's efficacy, tox, chemistry, safety data, all of that data to support the full application. Now, there's a second big difference, and this is due to a requirement that came into Canada as of October 1, 2020. Now, a DIN, straight-up DIN application, can be submitted via their new REP process, non-ECTD. A new drug submission requires this ECTD application format. This is called it uses the electronic common technical gateway via WebTrader, which is via the FDA. So DIN does not have that requirement, and then the new drug submission process does have that requirement. And just for folks who don't understand what the ECTD is, so essentially it's a standard format for submitting regulatory information or packages. And it's a series of folders and naming structures, formatting requirements, and there's a particular, it requires a software interface that builds your sequences and creates an XML backbone, and that XML backbone accompanies your electronic submission. So this hasn't been very well received by the industry because that tool, it can be quite expensive and a bit tedious, especially if you're not familiar with submitting ECTDs. But luckily, we can do that at TSG. We have the tool, we have the capabilities to submit ECTD on behalf of our clients.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Here's a question having to do with fine mist sprayer. So we have a fine mist sprayer we suggest to customers to use to apply our disinfectant. A sprayer must be labeled does the sprayer need to be labeled per the requirements? We are not making public health claims. We just say use this sprayer with our chemical. So I think the question that's being asked is, does that specific sprayer need to be on EPA approved label if you are recommending that this particular sprayer be used by your customers to apply the product? That's the way that I'm reading this question.
So Erin, are you looking for confirmation that when you have a registered product, an EPA-registered product, the modes of application are listed on the EPA stamp label and the container label that's distributed out in the marketplace. And that label, you can only use a label according to its directions for use. So if you want a specific application method for your product, you need to make sure that that application method is part of the directions for use and that EPA has reviewed that application method. So, common application methods are immersion, mopping, spraying. And when we talk about spraying, EPA does make a difference between coarse trigger sprayers, those 32-ounce bottles, electrostatic spraying. EPA has recently issued some information about how to add electrostatic sprayers for COVID products that have COVID claims. And there are also specific test methods that EPA require for something like fogging.
Okay.
I just want to
go ahead.
I was just going to add that, so they use the term fine mist, but EPA will really look at that based on the particle diameter size. So for example, electrostatic spray is greater than 40 micrometers. Fogging would be less than that. And so they're going to look at the diameter of the droplet. Right? Lisa, do you want to confirm that? Or am I wrong?
Absolutely. The micron size does, and that's part of when EPA evaluates your application. They're looking at the exposure to the person occupationally and also the person who may be using this in a residence. So they do make differentiations for occupational and residential exposure, but they're more concerned about the particle size and whether or not it's going to be respirable or not.
Okay. All right. The next question this is going to go to Abby because it relates to silver. Clothing, textile, apparel also make COVID claims if they have silver coating, for example. What would the process be to get that approval?
Great question. So EPA has offered a lot of guidance on what is required to get COVID claims, SARS-CoV-2 claims on hard non-porous surfaces. That was much the guidance that was released in October, pertains to those types of products. Textiles, EPA's guidance is somewhat lagging. There are some registered treated textiles out there, and these to make these kind of residual claims. At this point, they are limited to fungal and bacterial claims. There are EPA has not yet registered a textile making virucidal claims for residual. So you would need to approach EPA with a proposed test method for how you would demonstrate the efficacy of your product. EPA is going to require information and about how many washes the product remains effective through, so you can have on your label the life of that product, as well as the specific organism. So EPA has had a product registered for a really long time that is an antifungal socks for athlete's foot. EPA just recently registered a residual textile, self-disinfecting textile, but it again is limited to bacterial claims. So if you want COVID, you're going to have to go into EPA.
So here's another question that's sort of related. Is there a path to market in the U.S. for a treated article that does not meet the 3-log reduction for residual health claims?
So I'm going to propose we divide and conquer on this one. I'm going to tackle the treated article piece of that question, and then I'm going to ask Lisa or Chris to follow up on the efficacy piece of it. But I want to clarify an important point here. So treated articles are defined by EPA in the Code of Federal Regulations as articles that incorporate EPA-registered materials preservatives intended for that use for the preservation of the article itself, typically against odor, deterioration, decay, stain, those kind of claims. In-can preservatives are frequent examples, or textile treatments to prevent your clothes from getting smelly, for example. Treated articles must incorporate EPA-registered products, and they are limited in their claims to non-public health. So again, preservation of the article itself. any claim against a public health organism, you no longer meet the definition of a treated article in 40 CFR, and you do need to obtain pesticide product registration for the article itself.
So, Abby, I'll pick up on the what I'll call the registration portion of that. So will EPA accept something that has less than a 3-log reduction, which is 99.9%? Typically, all of EPA's registration standards require a minimum of a 3-log reduction. However, we recently seen on a Section 18 product where they did allow a 98 point something claim, but that was for an emergency exemption. And that emergency exemption is not a registration through EPA. That's a registration through the state, which EPA has reviewed, and the state owns the registration, and it's allowed in a specific use. So if you're looking to have a performance standard less than 3 logs, we would encourage you to have a pre-application meeting with EPA to be able to discuss the performance standard, because it is it's not within their current regulations to accept less than 3-log reduction for a FIFRA Section 3 registration.
Okay, thank you. I do have a follow-up about Section 18. So EPA granted an emergency exemption for a product surface-wise in Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. Do we anticipate EPA is going to do more, approve more products like this? And how long are these product approvals effective? How long, can they sell?
So kind of give you an overview of Section 18 registrations is that these are registrations that are sponsored through the state. So the state will get a Section 18 emergency application for them to review. It's sponsored either by a company or by an agency, and the state reviews that its applicability to their state. So, for example, for the surface-wise, a common part is Texas, and American Airlines sponsored that Section 18. It went to EPA. EPA reviewed the oversight, issued the state the authorization to do the Section 18, and those emergency exemption applications and authorizations are good for 1 year, with the understanding that these folks are going to pursue a regular Section 3 registration with U.S. EPA. Did I touch all the bases there, Erin?
Yes, thank you.
I think there was one more part of that question was, do we think EPA is going to issue more Section 18s? So I want to quickly answer that. And we've been getting some mixed messages from EPA. EPA has communicated to at least 1 or 2 of the states that they don't intend to issue any more Section 18s. And then about 2 weeks later, they issued the expanded surface-wise Section 18. So we know that EPA, with the addition of so many products on the market now that do have efficacy against SARS-CoV-2, the pressing need for these Section 18s does seem to be decreasing, because you can go to List N and the public can find a number of products out there that are registered for these uses. So there will be more of a challenge, I think, than there was a couple of months ago when EPA began issuing those Section 18s. The door is not entirely shut, but you do need to demonstrate to the state and then to EPA the need for the product and how no other product on the market can meet that need. And that's an important part of that Section 18 application, is demonstrating what the value is.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that add-on. All right, here's another question. Does EPA allow registrants to add use directions to create disinfectant wipes on site by having customers combine the pesticide product with the dry wipes on site? Who wants to take that one?
All right. So I'll take that one, Erin, is that what we'll say again, and because I said this previously, is that you are for the EPA stamp label, you are to apply the product according to the use directions on the label that EPA has approved. So if you have that application on your label that allows that your product to be used with a wipe in that fashion, then you could proceed.
Okay, thank you. All right, another question that I can answer easily is, do you have to have an agent in order to submit an application directly to EPA? And the answer is absolutely you can submit it on your own. You don't need an agent. However, if you're a foreign company, you do need a U.S. agent. But a U.S. company can submit applications directly. If you submit the application directly and there are deficiencies in it, oftentimes EPA, because they don't have the time to educate and hold companies' hands through the process, they will recommend that you retain an agent, a consultant to help. Okay, so another question has to do with how long does it take to get state registration? So I'm going to answer that one, and that is all the panelists are federal experts, although TSG does have an office in California, in Sacramento, right across the street from DPR. That's all they do is handle state registrations and renewals. Based on my limited understanding of the state process, you get about 5% approved in the first week, 5% of the states. You get about 15% in 4 weeks. You get about 55 to 60% in 2 months, and then the rest of them you get between 4 and 6 months, although I'm told from Kelly Ron, who leads our state practice, that some states are taking up to 8 months to approve products. So remember, you got to get your product approved federally, and then you can't sell it anywhere without getting the state approval first. Anybody have anything to add? Did I screw that up? Okay. I want to change my label. How long do I have to sell existing stock?
EPA will indicate in your approval letter for your amendment that you have 18 months typically to implement the change between that. Now, the specific wording says at next printing. However, they do allow up to 18 months to change that label stock over. And the states do monitor that. So while you're working on, once you get that amendment, you want to make sure that you're getting into the states so you can meet that 18-month implementation date. Now, for DCIs, data call-ins, those may get shorter timelines, but you want to refer to your EPA approval letter. It usually outlines your time in that letter.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. I think this one will probably be for Chris. How long does it take to get efficacy testing done? What's going on with the labs right now?
All right, so this is could be a loaded question. The labs are pretty backed up. COVID-19 has really taken its toll, not just on the regulatory offices, as you've been hearing, but also on all the laboratories, including our chemistry labs. So if you know you're going to have some testing, you're going to need some efficacy testing done, the first thing I would recommend would be to contact your microbiology laboratory and get in the queue for testing. Right now, they're backed up about 2 to 3 months for bacterial testing. And with the current demand for viral testing, that has extended the scheduling out to as much as 4 to 6 months. Just get on test. So, of course, this is definitely going to depend on the test method that you want to use, the microorganisms that you're going to test it against, and obviously the laboratory itself. So once you get yourself in queue, in the meantime, I would get your batches prepared and set out for your chemistry testing. So you will want to have your product tested to verify the level of active in order to confirm that it's at the LCL when the laboratory tests it for efficacy. So this is going to be showing up in a certificate of analysis, right, for each batch. These labs are also backed up, and it can take up to roughly about 3 months, we're hearing, for your C of A to get produced. So I recommend getting in the queue at the same time you're having your C of A done. I'm not going to say anything about your C of A and GLP because I think Lisa, that is your soapbox, and maybe she can chime in on that. But once you finally get your product in the lab to have it tested, I would say at least 4 weeks or longer, depending on the test that you're having done. For example, the residual efficacy test can take months, whereas a standard disinfection test can be done in just a few weeks. But regardless of what you have done, if you are having GLP testing done, don't forget that the lab will take a couple of extra weeks just to finalize that test report and get it out to GLP. So quite some time.
I'm going to be a little Debbie Downer here and add that a question we frequently get, given all of these lag times with the labs, is do I need to have all my data on hand when I submit to EPA, or can I submit additional data later? And the answer to that question is no. Your product application needs to be complete at the time of submission. So you can't submit to EPA and say, I've got more efficacy data coming, it'll be here. It needs to be, EPA needs to have it in hand at the time. You can always amend your registration. Once you have your application, you can add additional organism claims, additional contact times once you have that registration, but it does have to be complete at the time of submission.
Okay, thank you. All right, moving on. Someone is wishing us a happy International Women's Day week. But with that greeting, there's a question that says, what is the best way to engage the agency or agencies when you're planning to register a product that has both pesticidal and drug claims on the label? It's kind of a loaded question and a complicated answer. Do we have guidance for how you should approach the agencies?
Well, I'll take a stab by that by saying that the other agency in question here with the new drug is obviously the FDA. And EPA and FDA do not like to play in the sandbox together, or sometimes even acknowledge that the other agency exists. And so if you do have a product, most of the time the option is to have two products, an FDA-registered product and an EPA-registered product. There are products that are dual jurisdiction that have EPA and FDA, either from the medical side or from the food and drug side claims. So products that are used, for example, to clean medical devices or hospital rooms may fall into dual jurisdiction. Products that are used to clean food processing facilities may also fall under dual jurisdiction. So it depends on what your claims are going to be, so can't go into all of those details. The baseline is if your product is similar to other products that are out there, to follow that existing path. If there aren't any products out there that have your dual claims, I would want to engage with both agencies to determine how they would like for you to proceed. There are some areas where EPA and FDA do like to share jurisdiction. There are other areas where both agencies prefer to avoid asserting their authority, and so it can be very difficult at times to understand whose jurisdiction are you under. So if you do need to do that, it is going to require some engagement with one or both agencies.
Or to add to that, Abby, is sometimes it's the chicken and the egg situation. So if you're trying to get your food clearance on your EPA label, then you may need to get the FDA approval first and then get the EPA approval. So it's important, like you said, to engage with these regulatory authorities and communicate with them. And in most cases, they are helpful on trying to point you to the right direction.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I think our experience has been sometimes they volley it back and forth until somebody takes ownership. And, that's why it's so important to position it very carefully, because if that's going to happen, you want to make sure that the agency with the least requirements and easiest to get through will take ownership. Okay, I have two questions here related to electrostatic sprayers. Basically saying, if I use electrostatic spraying and the label directions basically say visibly wet the surface, does my spray label instructions stay valid?
All right, so there's two parts to this question because I'll take the first part and then I'll kind of hand that over to Chris Greene. Is that first, EPA is taking a stronger stance that the word spray may not include application by electrostatic spray because they've issued guidance under list for SARS-CoV applications. EPA is encouraging folks to actually have the applicator electrostatic sprayer on your label for spray. So I think that's one thing that you want to consider. The second is there are specific requirements that EPA has sent out as guidance on how electrostatic sprayers are qualified to be added to your label as an application device, and I'll let Chris explain that.
Sure, thank you. So one of the biggest requirements is this need for confirmatory efficacy data, and that confirmatory efficacy testing has to be conducted with the electrostatic sprayer, and that allows you to bridge from existing spray claims that you have on your label over to add the electrostatic spray, and it's assuming you already are registered with spray application. Otherwise, if you're not already registered and it's part of your registration, you still need to do that testing with the electrostatic sprayer. And that includes efficacy testing against Staph aureus, and then either Pseudomonas aeruginosa or it'd be the Salmonella enterica. So you still need your base microorganism and then virucidal efficacy against your hardest to kill virus. The testing is going to require wetness testing. And when they do that wetness testing, the laboratory should be shooting a video to show that the surface remains wet during the duration of that contact time. And then this minimum and maximum spray distance efficacy data also is part of that test. So what your minimum and maximum are actually going to be, they're vague about that in their guidance. So that's something you need to correlate with the laboratory. So it's somewhat of a trifecta. What's the capability of the sprayer, and then what can the laboratory actually measure, right? So they may have little test chambers that have a maximum distance that define that for you. So one of the other things I wanted to point out is that EPA recognizes that we have lab capacity concerns right now that don't appear to be letting up. So the EPA is going to and will accept this data as non-GLP, provided that the study report, should accurately detail out how the non-GLP procedures differ from what would otherwise be GLP standards in 40 CFR 160 in that statement of compliance. Does anyone else have anything they want to add to that?
The other thing is the current guidance that EPA has on their website regarding electrostatic sprays also requires some personal protective equipment language to be added to your label. So EPA is scrutinizing this application method more thoroughly, and that general spray is not necessarily saying electrostatic spray.
Right. So a follow-up question that we have is how do you know what chemicals are approved for allowing the product to be used with an electrostatic sprayer?
Again, this goes back to the stamp label. Is that the label tells you what the active ingredient is and what the chemistry is associated with that product. EPA is currently allowing us, if electrostatic sprayer is on the label, that any brand of electrostatic sprayer can be used to apply that product. So this is being done on a more product-by-product basis for application method. So it has to do with the application method that's allowed on that EPA stamp label for that product.
I mean, it's not like you can just do a database search to come up with all products that have that use. Unfortunately, it's a very manual process by looking at the product labels, right?
Right. Is that And if you had access to, there are subscription databases or lists that you could look at on EPA's website, but one of the things that they're not very good about indicating is the application method, because it would most likely, there is not a specific word for electrostatic spray. It would just say spray, and it would be very difficult to find. It's more of a needle in a haystack thing unless someone's advertising that they can be, an electrostatic sprayer can be used with their sanitizer disinfectant.
And one question, I think this will be for Abby. Does EPA look at company websites?
Yes, EPA has devoted resources looking at your company website. If you put your company website on your product label, then EPA will that website and the claims made are directly under their jurisdiction and for their review. But especially for companies with novel technologies, when you're coming in for a pre-submission meeting, for example, EPA will take a look at your website. So it's very important that you're aware of what your website says with regards to what's actually available for sale, depending upon your registration status, and what your claims are going to be. Another area I want to touch upon is that you may have a company that has products that are sold throughout Europe, for example, throughout Asia and the United States as well. And you may have a product that is approved for certain uses in Europe, for example, that does not have the same approvals in the United States at this point. You will need to be very careful to distinguish between what products are available for sale in the U.S. and Europe. A great way of doing this is to have your website just divvy it up by geography. And you can click on the corner U.S. or Europe, for example. But it's very important that you're very careful that you not imply that the product available for sale in the United States has claims that are only available in Europe, for example.
Okay, thank you, Abby. So we are coming close to the top of the hour, and I did want to make you all aware of some papers that we have. So I want to thank all of our panelists, and thank you all for submitting questions. I hope you learned something today. We got a lot of questions. We could not answer all of them, unfortunately, but I do recommend that you reach out to us, and we will be sending out the few slides that we have, so you'll have our contact information. So I did want to make you aware of some papers. So we've written 2 papers on pesticidal devices and how they're regulated and how to substantiate claims. These papers are on our website. You can download them. We do have another paper that's hot off the press. It's basically a summary of how various types of antimicrobial products are regulated in Canada. They're regulated by various government agencies, and the paper will explain sort of the landscape associated with different categories of antimicrobial products. 2 other papers that we're going to be releasing that may be of interest probably by the end of the month has to do with a consumer survey that TSG conducted in late December, early January. What we did was we looked at key factors sort of driving the purchase of hand sanitizers and antimicrobial consumer products. Our goal was really to understand what consumers wanted from these types of items and their thoughts around how important is scientific evidence with respect to effectiveness in their buying decisions, and quite honestly, do people trust the claims that are on the products? The sample size was relatively large. It was close to 9,000 adults. The research was commissioned in the U.S., the UK, Canada, France, Spain, and Germany. These papers will be made available on our website again in a few weeks, and we invite you to download those papers. So finally, I'd like to encourage our participants that are clearly interested in antimicrobial products I wanted to make you aware of an important conference that's coming up in the next few weeks. It's the Antimicrobial Workshop. It's organized by ISSA, HCPA, and ACC. TSG is a proud sponsor of this event, and our very own Abby Wacek will be moderating some of the sessions. So with that, I hope you all have a great day, and please do not hesitate to reach out to us if you have further questions and would like TSG's support. Thank you.